People have been torturing others all throughout human history, and these sick individuals came up with some of the most disgusting but creative ways to inflict pain onto others, mentally and physically, for their own horrific purposes. Like the brazen bull, for example. So for this bloody ordeal, I'm going to talk about 10 of the different torture methods and how people were either maimed or unalived, in detail, so don't say I didn't warn you if this gets too graphic. Imagine being hung by a noose, but on steroids. The upright jerker was a device invented in the 19th century and is used to unalive people quicker than a regular hanging. They did this by using weights that weighed hundreds of pounds to pull the executionee in a quick upward motion instead of the original trap door they put on the ground. The reason I put this on the list is because surviving this contraption is torture in itself. These devices were not very effective at breaking people's necks, so instead they would just be jerked and strangled. Pause. Take James Stevens for example, who was sentenced to death for the poisoning of his wife and was scheduled to be executed on June 18, 1895. Think about what it would be like for you to spend your last few minutes alive before being blindfolded and led to your execution. And right before they kill you, nothing happens because they played you like a fiddle. This used to be a psychological tactic used to put fear into people for the purposes of control and interrogation. This may not seem that bad, but as a matter of fact, this is nothing compared to the others on this list. But if you think about it, these people actually thought they were going to die, and that's not good. They did things to make them think that they were going to die, like making them dig their own graves, or pretending to shoot the person in the head, but either shoot in another direction or the gun was just unloaded entirely. The people involved probably have major PTSD afterwards, with a myriad of mental issues and trauma after experiencing these encounters of quote-unquote near death. This is the worst prank you can pull on anyone ever, if you could even call it that. In 18th century Europe, there was a punishment where people were sentenced to death by being hung in a cage outside for however long until they died from either a lack of food or water, or even the weather conditions. Either way, crappy ending. These cages would be hung up along town like a street decoration, so civilians were able to just look at these people fighting for their lives in a tight-ass cage. Once these people were dead, they would still leave their rotting corpses in the cage, like a bunch of disgusting heathens. The rotting smell from the bodies must have been enough to keep people up at night. This deterred other criminals from meeting the same fate, and really make them think twice before committing crimes such as murder, robbery, and piracy. If you were locked into these cages, you're either going to fry from the summer temperatures along with the hot metal cage that you're in, or you'll turn into an ice cube from the winter temperatures that are colder than the people who put you in the cage in the first place. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You get your tongue ripped out. I think you need that for speaking. But this punishment would happen to people who were heretics or committed acts of blasphemy. It would start off with the executioner that would first heat up the disturbing device, then would proceed to try and tear this person's tongue out. They would also try to cause additional pain on purpose by twisting the tongs around, making that person regret what they did in an instant. Knowing how bad oral hygiene was back then, the smell of burning saliva probably smelled like shit. I'm pretty sure some of y'all heard about this one, keyholing, but I just like to call it boat torture. But this is when a person is sentenced to death by being tied to a rope, then they lower you to the bottom of the ship, then they will proceed to drag you by your edges all across the ship, with barnacles in the bottom cutting them up. And barnacles are covered in a layer of calcium, serving as the outer shell, which is what makes them so sharp. So this executionee will be shredded like a cheese stick, and either die from the injuries, or live with permanent scars for the rest of their lives as a constant reminder of what they went through. This punishment was first documented by the Greeks in the Rhodian Martyrdom Code in 700 BC for the punishment for piracy. The punishment's first documentation was during the Greek times, and the Rhodian Maritime Code in 700 BC for the punishment for piracy. The Maritime Codes is a set of maritime laws adopted by the people of the island of Rhodes. I personally think that this is the more interesting one on the list, because in this case, nobody lays a finger on you. They just put you into a white empty room with white clothes, and the food they give you will consist of something white, like white rice on a white paper platter with a white fork. The lighting of the room is set in such a specific way to where it completely conceals your shadow, and the room is also soundproofed so the prisoners can't hear anybody but themselves the entire time. They also make it bright on purpose so that the prisoner loses sleep. This may seem mundane at first, but after a while, the mental side effects are profound. And the reason is due to lack of sensory perception. Your sense of time will go out the window. Oh wait, I forgot. There is no window. They have the ability to lose their identity and depersonalize from themselves, along with the classic hallucinations. This form of punishment first originated in Iran, and journalists were the main people to get locked into the White Room. So if I become a journalist one day, I know where I'm not going. Ah yes, shoulder dislocation. How classy. First your hands are tied behind your back, then the rope that is tied to your hands will be raised upwards, and the person that was left there in that position for up to an hour, with your shoulders and joints being the only thing supporting your body, increasing the chance your shoulders will pop and leaving you in unimaginable pain. They call this a reverse hanging for obvious reasons. That would add a weight to make your experience just that much better. This kinda sounds familiar. The nasty side effects from having this happen is nerve damage and ligament damage, causing loss of function in that area. These were also used to torture people during the Salem witch trials, which were mostly women. This punishment is so absurd that it's borderline comical. Poena Coeli originated in Rome and is thought to have occurred around 100 BC or earlier, and this word is Rome for penalty of the sack. These people will put you into a sack with your hands and feet tied up, then will put multiple different live animals in the sack, including dogs, monkeys, snakes, chickens, and roosters. Then they'll eventually pull a Bin Laden on you and chuck the sack into the ocean like it's trash day, with all the animals inside drowning you with them, if the animals didn't take you out first, that is. Emperor Hadrian was one who used this punishment, where he would put a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a chicken into a sack, with people in it. In the 3rd century, Poena Coeli died out, but then the Emperor Constantine revived it, and this dude only added snakes to the sack, which is a lot more sadistic in my opinion. Emperor Justinian brought back the punishment with 4 animals, and Poena Coeli remained the standard penalty for patricides, or the killing of one's father. This was within Byzantine law for the next 400 years or so, until they replaced it with being burned alive. Speaking of being burned alive, everyone loves barbecue, but not when it's people that are the ones being roasted. The gridiron is a punishment from the Middle Ages, which consisted of an iron grid that people were meant to be cooked to death on. This was placed over a fire, and the person would be tied up or shackled to the iron, then placed on the iron grill. The people who had to endure this were also covered in oil to make sure that these people were cooked like hot dogs. They were being roasted by the fire that's already burning and the increasingly hot iron that they're laying on. Think about a time where you briefly burned yourself badly. These poor souls are going through that times 1,000. They would do this to interrogate somebody for a confession, or just burn them to death. And I would not be surprised if people ate the bodies afterwards. Elephant execution is exactly what it sounds like. Coming from Asian areas, including South Asia, Southeast Asia, and India. And this is the messiest punishment on the list. This gruesome punishment contains of getting crushed by an elephant that a person is on top of directing, that they call a mahout. Depending on where you're at or what you did, they can either quickly crush you, or the much worse option, which is when they direct the elephant to slowly crush each of your limbs, putting you through pain beyond your comprehension. This punishment was mainly dished out by royalty. The elephants were a sign of royalty in Asian countries. Not only was it a sign of power and control over the elephants, but over the life and death of the person being crushed. if you were able to make it to the end of the video. Thank you. And since you're here, you might as well check out some of my other content.